Let's just get into it. You have been a part of Kenyan politics for quite a while, and you have witnessed the progression that we've had. So in your view, given what led to the aspirations behind the 2010 constitution, all the way from the situation at Bomas and the Bomas draft down to what we have as a document that has been lauded as very progressive and actually one of the best internationally, where do you think we are at as far as actualizing it?
Well, I would say that, first of all, it was a great milestone for the people of Kenya to be able to get this new constitution in place in 2010, because it was a journey that has lasted several years to get what you would call fundamental and significant constitutional amendments and not rushed constitutional amendments. So what I would say is that in the last 10 years, we should be very careful, because what is happening a lot of the time is that we are responding more to political concerns about aspects of the Constitution. And we have not had a thorough review from a professional perspective. You remember there was the Nyachai Commission, a constitutional committee, which would then submitted a report before their term expired, or just when the term was expiring, to be able to pinpoint specifically some of the areas that really required further review. But we are now seeing more of a politician-driven initiative to look at some of the amendments. And I've not seen them yet. We haven't seen them formally. But maybe in due course, when either the BBI comes out or when they're clearly drafted,
yes,
then we shall understand what are the gists of the proposed amendments.
Yes.
So my take is that we need to be very careful. No constitution is perfect, but we need to be extremely careful that in the process of improving what the 2010 constitution is, we actually focus on that needs to be improved, so that we are not seen to dismantling a very good constitution.
We might be coming up with changes that are born out of convenience for some political players, is what you mean. Now,
yes.
Let's take a look at some of the elements that were quite celebrated when this constitution was promulgated. Now, the two-thirds gender rule has been something that, it seems to have just defeated the leadership in ensuring it comes into reality. We have had an article this morning by Mercy Adhiambo, who has said that, who interviewed Priscilla Nyokabi, who said the BBI is the only hope to ensuring this happens. This is a reality, because sometimes when you're having such a good law and we're having people coming up and having to elect leaders when traditionally the male candidates are more favored, and other efforts from NGOs and even politicians themselves have failed to ensure we are having two-thirds gender rule, have not been successful. What do you make of that, looking towards the BBI as the only option towards ensuring we have diversity and fairness in terms of representation?
Well, all I can say is that it is true that has been a big miss. Perfect implementation of the gender rule has been a big miss in the context of this constitution. Now, as to whether the BBI will provide a solution or not, I would be speculating at this point in time, because the final report of the BBI is not yet out. But we must look at it this way: there are different initiatives that will come up from time to time, which will sometimes hinge on the amendment of the Constitution. Today, there's talk about the BBI initiative or proposals that we are yet to see in their final form. But there could be other initiatives that will come through over time. A few days ago, we saw the Third Way Alliance driven initiative, but then it did not succeed. So what I can only say is that in constitutional making, we may be passionate, but we should also try and be very objective as a people and make sure that there's proper public participation before we move into any amendments. Yeah. So I'm not saying that amendments are not required. They may be required, but let us make sure that they're well thought out.
Now, when you look at how we have fared on with this particular matter of gender, do you think that we have exhausted every other way that possible to ensure that it is actualized?
Well, there has been a challenge on quite a number of areas of the implementation of the Constitution, the gender being one of them. I think we as Kenyans perhaps need to do a little more in committing ourselves to genuine implementation of our Constitution, because you have flagged, for instance, the angle around the gender, but there are other aspects that you see. Are we, for instance, implementing the tenets of devolution appropriately? Are we implementing aspects of the Chapter 6 on integrity appropriately? Yeah. Are we, for instance, ensuring that independent institutions recognized in the Constitution are working as they should be working? Or do we still see clawbacks in some of these areas and reluctance by one institution to support the other? For instance, are resources being disbursed to the county governments in a timely manner in accordance with the functions that have been devolved? Health is devolved, but are we seeing the resources, commensurate resources, going to the counties with this new function of health? I don't think so. We still see what you'd call centralized procurement concentrated at the center, yet functions have been devolved. You can say the same for agriculture and other areas. Now, we're also seeing challenges around the issues of the judiciary and how they work and how they're funded. The Constitution envisaged that an independent institution would have its charge on the consolidated fund, but is the judiciary having that?
Well, Musalia, I would like us to go down into some of these other elements. Far from the two-thirds general rule, we have that, what you have mentioned, Chapter 6 of the Constitution, that is supposed to stipulate what leadership, accountable leadership, should look like. And corruption has been rife ever since and even before this Constitution was put forth for the Kenyan people. So what are the failures? Because if it is the agencies, we do have them that are meant to actually prosecute or investigate. We have a judiciary that is now independent and can actually go ahead and work against such elements in our society. So what do you make of how we have fared on that particular angle, and how can we shift and ensure that we are implementing the Constitution and living up to the standards it's set for us?
Well, that is precisely what I was trying to highlight, that we need to be honest and truly committed to the implementation of the Constitution. We are still seeing some element of tug of war, sometimes between the executive and the judiciary. We are seeing some tug of war sometimes between the national government and the county governments. So clearly, somewhere along the line, we have what you would call pockets of resistance when it comes to genuine implementation of our Constitution. And whether this is by design or whether it is a question of incapacity, that is perhaps a moot point. But all along, I have the conviction that it is us to make the Constitution work for us.
Now, that issue also overlaps with the health issue because we are having a crisis right now. We need funds disbursed to ensure that the counties are fighting, fighting off COVID-19. But at the same time, corruption reports have been all over the place, and we are now dealing with a situation where funds and people may have tried to profit off of the pain of Kenyans. So, as far as devolution of health goes, that falls under the whole issue of devolution. What do you think could have been done better to ensure that those units at the county level mandated with handling the health of the people at the grassroots level could survive and handle themselves, or stand against the winds of COVID-19 in a better way as opposed to what we are seeing right now? Was it a failure in terms of ensuring corruption is not rife, or was it a failure in terms of ensuring devolution as far as health is concerned was done right?
It's a mixture of both, but more so here. And perhaps what comes to mind is the alleged misappropriation of COVID-related funds. I think what is clear is that this one is purely a matter of human dishonesty and greed working against the Kenyan people. Why do I say this? I say this because when KEMSA, for instance, was established, it was established, and by the way, there have been many scandals around medical procurement in this country. This is not the first time. There have been many prior to what we are experiencing today. When you look at KEMSA, it was supposed to allow the nation to benefit from what you would call the economies of scale, so that when it is procuring drugs for the Kenyan people and it's procuring in bulk, it can benefit from the economies of scale and therefore cascade that benefit of lower prices to the Kenyan people. But what we are now seeing is that instead of achieving that, the institution has been a profiteering center for people who want to take advantage of the current situation in the country, and that must be stopped. When we talk about the county governments, you will see and note that in the county governments, the nurses, the medical staff are protesting. Either they have not received their pay, or they are purely equipped and their lives are at risk, and they don't have certain equipment to conduct their professional outlook or duties as they should be. So clearly there is corruption here as the dominant factor undermining health and the provision of health services in the country, and it should be dealt with.
Mm-hmm. Now, far from that, let us talk about cohesion, another element that was meant to, come out of the implementation of the Constitution if it's done right. Do you think such a thing can be even legislated or, put forth to actualized from a document? There are certain elements of our society, and particularly when we see how we handle not corruption, but our election period and our campaigns, that you do wonder whether or not it is a matter of implementing the Constitution or the kind of leadership that we have. What do you make of the failure to put aside ethnic politics and all these things that go against a cohesive society?
Well, I don't know whether we are cursed by virtue of the fact that we have over 42 communities, or we are blessed. But I think the most important thing is to ensure that if we talk about democracy and we want to institutionalize democracy, then let us follow the law as it is provided for in the Constitution. All the tension we saw in the past and even in the most immediate elections were anchored on institutions that were compromised in one way or the other, or getting direction in a manner that was contrary to the Constitution. And this was upheld even within the context of the Supreme Court ruling when you look at the elections of last time. Aspects about results transmission, aspects about how this, the issues of the servers and how they're supposed to handle. We saw what would have been appeared as intimidation of IBC staff, commissioners leaving, some members of staff losing their lives and at very critical moments. So this boiled down to a situation where you're dealing with people who do not want to follow the law. And I would not want to say that that is because of our ethnic heritage. I think it was just because there are certain people who do not want to follow the law. Now, a few days ago, somebody asked me, there's this debate around the deep state and bringing out that no matter what you do, the deep state will not allow people to move forward. Now, you see, here is a narrative which we are beginning to again propagate and embrace, talking about a deep state, an animal called the deep state, a big brother called the deep state, invisible. But we talk of it, and yet we say we are preparing for free and fair election. So if we constantly fall into the trap of generating a narrative of deep state, what you're telling the Kenyan voter is that forget your vote. Your vote does not count. It means nothing, because somewhere along the line, there's a deep state which will determine who is elected in what position. Now, this is the dangerous talk that we as a Kenyan must collectively dismiss and put aside so that we can entrench democracy as envisaged in the Constitution and as recognized in proper international circumstances where democracy thrives.
Right. Now, when you say we should put it aside, should we put it aside as a narrative, or do you not believe that there is an actuality?
I think when I say we should put it aside, I mean we should debate and actually make sure that it is a matter we kill, we put to rest, that we want to consolidate genuine democracy, and we don't want to have owls hovering in our compound called the deep state.
Right. Now, Honorable, Musalia, we do have a question that we are asking our viewers this morning. Should the Constitution be changed? Do you think that we are just having an implementation issue, or can most of these things, some of them that are just policy issues, be implemented in the right way and things should change without having to entirely change the Constitution or actually send the whole entire country into a referendum? What is your stand on that?
If you are to put this matter to scale, I would say that the bigger portion of our weight should actually go to proper implementation of the current Constitution. So if indeed there are some areas that may require amendment, and maybe there's merit in one or two areas requiring some amendment, I think the bulk of it must remain with fidelity to implementing the Constitution as it is. I do not know, and as we speak now, maybe very few people know what is the actual proposed amendment that is going to come to the table, because no bill has been drafted yet. No substantive proposal has been put on the table yet. So we will wait to see what are these proposed amendments. And if they make sense, I'm sure Kenyans then would embrace them. If they do not make sense, again, Kenyans will express themselves on the matter.
Okay.
So
Go
Yes,
on.
go ahead.
Yeah. So you yourself are an economist. I would like your take on how we should have implemented the constitution and what it would have had, what changes would have had in terms of our prosperity as a nation and development, both socially and economically. Could you speak to that and what you see are failures economically that could have their roots in a lack of implementing the constitution as it should be?
I think one of the critical areas that we need to look at when we implement the constitution would be areas around aspects of management of public finances. I think these are areas that we may want to look at a little more critically, because what we are reeling from now is an economy that is now heavily indebted. We need to perhaps look at, when we look at procurement laws, when we look at aspects of public finance management and so forth, and how they're anchored within the context of the Constitution. Those are areas that may need some refining if they're not properly refined, or they may need proper implementation where we can see laxity, because these are now beginning to impact so many other sectors. For instance, why are we now having complaints or a serious standoff between resource or revenue allocation to the counties and the national government? In reality, if I may just give a very quick example, this debate is centered around 315 or 16 billion Kenya shillings out of a budget of 3 trillion. So you're talking of roughly 10%. Now, why is there such a serious standoff? Whether it is the one man, one vote issue, but at the end of it, underlying around all this is the fact that the government is now strained. And because it is strained, the resources that are supposed to go to the counties so that devolution can be properly consolidated are beginning to become difficult to go by. So when you look at it from that perspective, you can see if, from an economist viewpoint, if you do not follow the Constitution and make sure that laws and matters of public finance are properly handled, you can end up undermining very significant aspects of this Constitution.
Okay. Now, far from that, your party and yourself as a leader, what are you going to actively do to ensure that we are at a place where we're having a constitution that is honored, given how good it is? By the experts have lauded it. So many people have called it admirable in what it envisions for this country. So what are your plans in ensuring that we are living up to those standards?
I think the most important thing now is to make sure that since we are getting to a cycle where we are about to elect Kenya's new leadership, as a party, apart from consolidating, I think it is important in partnership with yourselves. When I say yourselves, I mean the communication people in this country. It is time that we all rallied behind educating Kenyans through very serious and aggressive campaigns on the kind of choices we ought to make. Because at the end of the day, it is the leadership that we put in place that will determine how that constitution is going to be implemented. Are we putting in place thugs? Are we putting in place conmen? Are we putting in place people who will live up to the spirit and the letter of the law? Who are we choosing? Now, this is perhaps where our Achilles' heels have been, that over the years in Kenya, when we get to the election cycle, we put very little premium in and trying to assess and understand who these individuals who are seeking public office are. We end up glorifying the form in which they present their case, but we don't go to the substance of these individuals. And this has been hurting us. And it will continue hurting us unless there's a concerted effort, both within political parties to also bring forth good people, but also for the media. And I'm really pleading to the media here because they are very powerful, very, very powerful institution in shaping the future of our country.
Indeed. Now, you mentioned a very important issue, that is political parties and what they stand for. In terms of how we go about our democracy, talk to us about the party ideologies and how we should be forming these, because this would also influence what we tell the common mwananchi during campaign periods and when we are communicating with them and convincing them to vote as opposed to your person or this individual. Talk to us about what changes can be done in that aspect.
There could be many, but let me just give a very quick example because maybe this might help in crystallizing on this issue. Look at this very interesting debate that is coming up, but very divisive, the Hustler dynasty debate. You know, this is a very simplistic way of getting people to walk into an election with not looking at ideology. When our forefathers fought for independence, they said that we want to fight against poverty, ignorance, and ill health, ugonjwa. Now, when you look at it from that perspective, they were saying that you cannot politicize and glorify poverty. We take our children to school because we want them to get out of difficult situations and fend for themselves and feed themselves and eventually feed their families. So when you go into a campaign mode and you want to tell people this election is simply an election of dynasties versus hustlers, you are now appealing to negative emotions. What we need to look for is this. Do my policies, does ANC present a package of policies that will alter the livelihoods of our people in the context of, can I create jobs for the many people? Can I make sure that there is medicine in the hospitals? Can I make sure that our agriculture will thrive through these policy programs? Now, those are the issues that we should encourage our voters to start interrogating, not to start interrogating whether I'm short or tall, not to start interrogating whether I'm fat or thin. So these are the kind of issues that I say we owe it to our people. And I think going into the next election, the issue of the policies and how you intend to implement them and how you intend to fund them should be the debate that Kenyans want. Why are we heavily indebted? We are heavily indebted because the Jubilee government promised too many things within such a short time frame. They would implement that, they would implement that, they would have stadia, they would have what, you name it, within such a short time frame. But what they were not telling us is how they really intended to fund this. Now, here we are, with debt that is 60% of our GDP. And that has implications now in job creation. It has implications on devolution. It has implications on our agriculture. It has implications on our tourism, because whether we like it or not, whatever resources we have, when you follow the Constitution, there's always the first charge on the consolidated fund, and that you cannot run away from. We must pay our debts. So what then are we saying we want to move forward? Let us talk about policies. I'll be the happiest man or the happiest Kenyan the day we will know that our choices matter.
Thank you very much, Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, the ANC party leader, seasoned politician, giving us his views on the constitution, its implementation, its hits and misses. Thank you very much for giving us your time this morning to give us your sentiments on that running theme that we are having on constitution at 10. Let us take a short break. When we come back, we shall have more for you right here on Morning Express.